When I first started investing, I remember feeling completely overwhelmed. There's so much information out there, everyone seems to have a different opinion, and the thousands of different stocks and funds to choose from can be pretty daunting. And while I got a few things right early on, there are plenty of mistakes that I made, or easily could have made, and unfortunately I see a lot of beginner investors make them too. They're the kind of mistakes that can quietly cost you thousands over the years, or even put you off investing altogether. So in this video, I want to walk through 5 beginner investing mistakes I'd definitely avoid if I were to start investing again today. These are based on my experience and research and seeing what actually causes people to fail or give up. The frustrating thing is that most of these problems are completely avoidable, but we're just not taught any of this. You have to figure out yourself through experience. The truth is, investing doesn't need to be complicated, but you do need a solid foundation and the right mindset if you want to give yourself the best chance of success. Before we jump into mistake number 1, remember that this video is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and is not investment advice. When investing, your capital is at risk and you may get back less than you invest. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results, and you should always do your own research or consider consulting with a qualified financial advisor if unsure about anything. This is something I see all the time, not using a tax-advantaged account. So many beginners start investing for a general investment account because it's the first thing they see when they download an app or sign up to a platform. They begin building a portfolio, make a few gains, and feel like they're on the right track. But then, sometime later, they're hit with a capital gains tax bill or realize they have to pay tax on their dividends. It becomes even more disheartening when they realize they could have kept more of their gains if they just used the right type of account from the start. In the UK, we have a massive advantage with tax-efficient accounts like the Stocks and Shares ISA. Inside an ISA, you can deposit up to £20,000 per tax year, and all your capital gains and dividends are completely sheltered from UK tax. The allowance resets each April, and importantly, there's no cap on how large your ISA can grow. The only limit is on how much you can contribute per tax year. So, for most UK investors, it rarely makes sense to use a general investment account until they've used their ISA allowance. Of course, I'm not talking in absolutes here. Everyone's circumstances are different, and tax treatment can vary. But speaking generally, a Stocks and Shares ISA is well worth prioritizing. Taxes can eat into your returns, create admin headaches, and ultimately slow down how quickly you reach your financial goals. So when we have an account as powerful as the ISA available, it would be a shame not to make full use of it and end up paying tax that could have been completely avoidable later down the line. The key takeaway here is simple. When investing for my future, I always make sure that I'm using tax-advantaged accounts from the start. It's one of the easiest ways to improve my long-term returns without taking on any extra risk. Thankfully, there are now some really low-cost platforms that make it simple to do exactly that, including one that's recently made its Stocks and Shares ISA even more affordable. That brings us on to Lightyear, the sponsor of today's video. Lightyear have recently removed commission on trades from their Stocks and Shares ISA, making it one of the cheapest ISA providers on the market right now. As you can see, there's no commission on trades, no account fee, and a low foreign exchange fee of just 0.35%. Note that fund manager fees may apply. Their app is genuinely one of my favorites. It's clean, easy to navigate, and designed with long-term investors in mind. The ETF research tools are particularly useful. You can see each fund's fees, how it compares to similar ETFs, a full sector and holdings breakdown, and even a visual map of where the companies in that fund are based around the world. Alongside thousands of stocks and ETFs, you can also make use of Lightyear Vaults to earn interest. Vaults use BlackRock money market funds that closely track the Bank of England rate, and at the time of recording, the rate is 4.03% AER. Of note, that's a variable rate, so it may change. And as with all investments, vaults carry their own risks. If you'd like to give it a try, Lightyear have also revamped their welcome offer. You can now get up to £100 in a US fractional share, or ETF subject to fractional availability, when you sign up via my link in the description and deposit at least £100 yourself. If you're watching on TV, you can scan the QR code on screen, or simply use my promo code TOM, or in the promotions section of the app. You can find the full details in the description below. Remember, when investing, your capital is at risk and the value of investments can go down as well as up. Thanks again to Lightyear for sponsoring this video. Mistake number 2 is picking the wrong risk level, and this is one that catches so many people out, often without them realizing it. When most of us start investing, we have no idea what risk level actually means or how much risk we should actually take. We just see labels like cautious, balanced, or adventurous on a robo-advisor or investment platform, and pick one that feels comfortable. That's exactly what I did when I first started. I was investing via my bank, and I went for something in the middle, a so-called balanced portfolio. As I didn't really know what I was doing, it felt safe, sensible, and not too extreme either way. However, what I didn't really understand back then was what that choice meant in practice. A medium risk portfolio usually holds an equal proportion of bonds and equities, which may mean lower volatility, yes, but also less potential for long-term growth. Knowing what I know now, I was aged 21 at the time, with decades ahead of me, that portfolio was far too conservative for my goals and risk tolerance. It wasn't suitable for me, and I was foregoing returns in favour of stability due to my lack of knowledge. The way I like to think about risk is that it's not just about how much a portfolio moves up and down, but it's also about how much time I have to recover from those movements. The longer my time horizon, the more room I have to ride out dips and crashes in pursuit of higher long-term returns. Historically, the global stock market has always recovered, but it can take time. Whilst past performance is not a guarantee of future results, I find this reassuring as a long-term investor. The other side of this, though, is that it's easy to go too far in the opposite direction, piling everything into concentrated funds because they performed well recently, or because you think you can handle the volatility. Then when markets fall and you see drops of 20 or 30%, it suddenly feels unbearable and you end up selling at the worst possible time. This can be even worse with individual stocks, as whilst diversified funds may have a greater chance of recovering over the long term, many individual stocks do experience catastrophic losses and never recover. What I've learned is that the right level of risk is one that you can understand and, most importantly, can stick with. There is no point going with a 100% equity allocation in your portfolio if you'll be constantly worrying about it and tempted to sell at the worst possible times. It's all about finding a balance that works for you. A slightly less aggressive portfolio that you can hold through thick and thin will almost always be a high-risk one that you regularly abandon. It's important to think of risk in three ways. Risk tolerance, how much volatility can you emotionally handle? Risk capacity, how much risk can you afford to take based on your finances? And required risk, or need to take risk. How much risk is required to meet your financial goals? This works both ways, but in the case of taking too little risk, your portfolio may end up falling short of your expectations. For me personally, understanding risk in this way, alongside learning more about investing in general, made me realise that a balanced portfolio was wrong for me. Instead, I was more suited to 100% equity allocation. Of course, the point here is not always to take more risk, but instead to make sure you're taking the right amount of risk for you. Mistake number 3 is home bias, putting too much of my portfolio into UK companies simply because they feel familiar. I think this is something almost every investor goes through at some stage. When you first start investing, it's natural to gravitate towards what you know. You recognise the names on the FTSE 100, you might use some of their products day to day, and it feels reassuring to invest in those businesses. In the UK, it's also common for investors to be drawn towards dividend stocks, since UK companies often have relatively high yields. Now, that's not to say that having a UK-focused portfolio will necessarily lead to poor returns. I have no way of knowing for sure, and of course, there will always be periods when the UK market does well, and when certain individual UK stocks deliver excellent performance. However, the problem is that the UK stock market only makes up around 3.3% of global equity markets. So if my portfolio was entirely UK focused, that would mean more than 96% of the world's opportunities were being missed, including some of the most innovative and fastest growing companies in the US, Europe, and Asia. For diversification reasons, I prefer global exposure, and I achieve that using broad, diversified ETFs that hold thousands of companies from all over the world. That way, I'm not betting on one country or one currency doing well, but instead on the growth of the global economy as a whole. Personally, I also find that global exposure makes it easier to stay invested. If one region struggles, another might be doing well, which helps smooth the ride and reduces the temptation to tinker. With a global market cap weighted fund, I'm letting the market decide how much weight each stock, country, and sector should have, rather than letting any home bias influence my capital allocation. There's nothing wrong with having some home bias. I still occasionally invest in a few individual UK stocks to satisfy that itch, but I see them as smaller positions, not the core of my portfolio. Whatever I decide, the key is simply being aware of what it means. If my portfolio ends up being mostly UK-based, just because it feels familiar, I'm probably lacking diversification and taking on more risk than I realise. Mistake number 4 kind of links to the last point, but it's overcomplicating things. And I think this might be one of the most common traps investors fall into once they get past the absolute beginner stage. At some point, we all start thinking that a more complex portfolio must mean a better one. I went through that phase myself, constantly tinkering, adding new specialized ETFs, fine-tuning allocations, and convincing myself that all the extra work and thought was worth it. In reality, I was just making things more confusing and hard to stick with. The problem is that complexity often gives the illusion of being beneficial. It feels like you're doing something smart, but you may actually just be increasing admin and making it harder to stay consistent. For many people, that complexity leads to holding several funds that give a false sense of diversification, when in reality, they all hold many of the same underlying companies. This is called overlap. The number of tickers in a portfolio doesn't always mean you're spreading risk. You could just be doubling down on a handful of mega-cap stocks without even realizing it. If that's intentional and part of a clear strategy, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but in most cases, it probably isn't. Even when a complicated portfolio is well designed, it can still cause problems. You might have sound reasoning for each fund and feel confident you can stick with it. However, in my case, over time, the behavioral side of investing kicked in. I started doubting parts of the portfolio, second-guessing decisions, and endlessly tinkering. The truth is, it doesn't matter how good a portfolio looks on paper if you can't actually stay invested in it. For me, the turning point was realizing that simplicity isn't a weakness. A simple portfolio makes it far easier to stay disciplined. When markets fall, I'm not wondering which fund to top up or which one to sell. I just stick to my plan. Behaviorally, that's a huge advantage for me. These days, I build my portfolios using a core and satellite approach. A global fund sits in the core, which is the part I don't touch, and then I have smaller satellite funds that let me explore different strategies without constantly tinkering the bulk of my investments. I try to keep things clean and intentional. Every position I hold has to have a clear purpose. I no longer see my portfolio as a source of stress and instead see it as a vehicle for achieving my goals. Mistake number 5 is recency bias. Placing too much weight on what's recently happened and assuming it will continue. This one is all about mindset. When people start investing, it's natural to think that whatever the market's been doing lately is what it will keep doing. If things have been going up, we expect more of the same. If they've been falling, we assume they'll keep falling. But markets don't work like that. They rise, they fall, and sometimes they do nothing for long stretches of time. Just look at the run we've had recently. The so-called Trump tariff dip perfectly coincided with the new tax year. So anyone who started investing this April has seen almost nothing but green since. That's great, but it can also lead to unrealistic expectations. On the other hand, an investment in an S&P 500 ETF made in December 2021 was still in the red nearly 2 years later by October 2023. For a lot of new investors who started during that period, it must have felt like investing was a complete waste of time. Many probably gave up. And that's the thing about recency bias. Our first experience of the market tends to shape how we think about investing for years afterwards. If your early experience was positive, you might assume investing is easy. If it was negative, you might decide it's not worth it. Both are dangerous mindsets. The reality is that 2 years or even 5 years means very little in the context of a lifetime of investing. Despite this, after one bad day following months of gains, social media is full of posts asking what's happened or whether it's time to sell. Personally, I've learned it's far better to zoom out and remind myself that investing is a long-term game. Volatility is to be expected, and dips and crashes are simply part of the process. Whilst past performance doesn't guarantee future results, over decades those short-term swings usually turn out to be just noise. So for me, avoiding recency bias means accepting that markets move in cycles, staying invested through the ups and downs, keeping regular contributions going, and trusting that time in the market does the heavy lifting. So those are the 5 beginner investing mistakes that I'd definitely avoid if I was starting again today. Most of these come down to the same underlying principles. Keep things simple, control what I can, and don't worry about what I can't control. And most importantly, think long term. The market will always be unpredictable, but my process doesn't have to be. If you found this video helpful, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content. Thanks again to Lightyear for sponsoring this video. You can check out the offer via the link in the description. Remember, when investing, your capital is at risk and the value of investments can go down as well as up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.